So Roger asked me to provide some perspectives from NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration from the United States. And it's been really great to be able to interact with folks like yourselves as we have evolved our coral reef conservation program to be more adaptive to what's happening. And I'm happy to say that government is actually on track with tracking science, which is sometimes refreshing. So that being said, just a little bit of context. We have all the same threats that every other coral reef in the world has in terms of land-based sources of pollution, fishing, impacts, bleaching. And then we've all experienced this massive 3 years of global coral reef bleaching, still some places in the United States that are in years 5 and 6 in rapid succession. Guam has not stopped bleaching. There's a few places in Hawaii that seem to be bleaching more frequently. So this is kind of the new norm for different reefs in the United States. And if that wasn't bad enough, we now have this massive disease epidemic in the Caribbean and the southern part of the United States, Stony coral tissue loss disease. I'll be talking a lot more about it during the general meeting, but basically this thing is on the move. We don't know what it is. We know it's waterborne. It impacts different species differently, but can lead up to about 90% mortality of certain species. And the outbreak's been ongoing and it's been persistent, and we still don't know what it is. So it's now moved largely around the Caribbean, not in a predictive capacity. So we're looking into ballast water and hull fouling issues, trying to think that maybe that's part of it. And the latest report that we got is that it may be in Panama. There's the Panama Canal. We're a little bit worried. A lot worried, actually. So, so this is something that we really need to keep an eye out on, and the U.S. has done a lot to get ahead of this disease and done a big effort to rescue corals out of Florida, get them out of the path of the disease, and they're now in aquaria all around the United States thanks to the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. So just a little bit about the evolution of the NOAA's Coral Reef Conservation Program. I think it actually followed the evolution that Lizzie just went through in terms of, I think we started more at that ecosystem-based management perspective. We were certainly not single species ever, but now very much moving into resilience-based management. And thanks to folks in this room, thanks to Roger, who came and did a science evaluation for us a couple years ago, we are operating under a new strategic plan that is very much all about resilience-based management. So this is another contextual slide here. We're kind of all over the place in terms of U.S. reefs, but what's interesting is at the federal level, we don't actually manage much in the way of the shallow water areas. These corals are actually in state and territorial waters, so a lot of what we do is doing the science, developing tools, developing best practices, and then developing capacity at the local level for people to take care of their own reefs and trying to make that something that can be quickly taken up and employed based on different scientific levels of expertise, different levels of resources, and sometimes it's just sheer numbers of people in different areas that actually do this kind of work. So it's not terribly common to find a lot of coral reef conservation in some of our remote Pacific territories. So this is a snapshot of our new strategic plan. What's over here on the left is sort of our theory of change. What's going to happen under this new strategic plan if we continue to mitigate for local stressors, human-induced things, continue to conduct restoration and interventions, and couple that with always improving our understanding of coral reef ecosystems and increasing our partners' capacity to manage coral reefs, we will get to a state of improved management of coral reefs. So if you look at a couple of the long-term goals there, you see where really resilience-based management starts to come into play quite a bit. And that top one there, corals, restore key coral species to maintain ecosystem function. That's really what we're all about, and I think it fits well into the definition of resilience-based management. And starting with that first pillar there, our climate pillar, it is actually increased resilience to climate change, and that will play out across all four of those pillars. Everything that we do will be with an eye towards future climate conditions, building towards the future, whether it's a fisheries management plan, a watershed management plan, or how we approach coral restoration. It will always be trying to adapt to what we think is going to happen and being more resilient. So just to dig a tiny bit in on that resilience to climate change, this is really about, for the United States, furthering this concept of resilience-based management and getting it into the hands of the local managers, whether you're a nonprofit, whether you're a community group, whether it's an academic institution or the local government, so that these are familiar concepts and not scary concepts and things that we can make easy and quite logical. So this is a slide that I stole from Jeff Maynard, and I wanted to dig a tiny bit in on a pilot project that we've got going in Hawaii that Eric Conklin's actually going to dig into a bit more than I will. But in this effort to support resilience-based management, what we're really looking at is into the future, what are the exposures to climate stress that we're likely to see? And when you figured that out, can you couple that with your understanding of resilience? So if resilience is resistance and recovery, you understand that at the local level. On top of what your human impacts are, you get a good understanding of what the vulnerability is of different reefs at a fairly finite spatial scale. And that plays a lot into the strategies that we'll undertake to restore viable populations of coral reefs. I'm not going to go into all of the different permutations here, but really this is all being done so that when we get to the point that we're going to wholesale go into restoration, especially in the Pacific, that we've done this in a really thoughtful way. The Caribbean has quite a couple of decades of restoration experience under its belt. They've done a lot of trial and error, and it's hard to package 20 years of that and just plop it into the lap of the Pacific manager. So we're trying to do this in a fairly thoughtful way. A couple other things going on in NOAA. We commissioned the National Academy of Sciences to do a study on the more innovative coral interventions that are going on. There's a few Academy members here in the room. Thank you very much for all of the help that you guys gave us in looking at those 23 interventions, and we will shortly be putting a NOAA paper out on which of those interventions we'll be pursuing in the very near future and how we plan to do that. And I'm hoping it's useful for every coral manager because there's a lot of great information in there. And then also, through the help of the Nature Conservancy and others, we're also publishing a manager's guide to coral reef restoration planning and design, which incorporates all of this great stuff. We suspect that Reef Futures will be the next Coral Restoration Consortium meeting, which happened in, I guess it was a year ago, last December in Florida. The next one we're hearing maybe May of 2021 to try to decouple it from other large coral conferences. And then there's a new initiative underway that I think makes a big splashy announcement either this week or next in Florida, where we're launching this Florida Keys 7 Iconic Reefs Restoration Plan, which is a very ambitious public-private partnership that we're calling for to do large-scale restoration at an ecosystem level in these 7 iconic reefs. These are reefs that people well know and love and have been diving on for years. And it's going to be crazy ambitious in terms of the amount of partners and dollars that are going to be needed to effectuate this, but it truly is a blueprint. We've interacted with a number of different foundations and big funders who've said, give us a blueprint, give us an ask. Don't just tell us tell us how to do it, what you need, where you're going to do it, and then we can talk partnership. So I really look forward to seeing how that plays out. And then lastly, within my program, within the Coral Reef Conservation Program, we are going to launch a new grant program in honor of Ruth Gates, really focusing on those more unique interventions and harnessing her just total. If you had the chance to ever listen to Ruth or talk to her, she just had this worldview of optimism and not letting anything getting in her way, never saying no, moving around you if you're an impediment. And we're really going to try to harness that through this grant program and get some exciting things funded that way, and hoping to get some partnerships to make sure that that's a much bigger program than the measly $500,000 I have to throw at it right now. So moving on to that manager's guide, where I think a lot of the resilience-based management plays in, and the things I talked about previously, we're really in site selection. Where do you restore? What are you restoring for? What do you need to bring to bear? What are you ignoring? What questions haven't you asked when you're going to decide that you want to restore something? So just a quick sketch here. It starts with that vulnerability to climate exposure. So this lower graph here is looking at when are you getting to the point where you're getting annual severe bleaching. And then of your reefs, which ones are the ones that are likely to get to that annual severe bleaching status before the other ones, and then choosing the ones that are going to go later in the century for your primary management and potentially restoration activities. This is a snapshot of something Jeff Maynard put together where we had a heck of a lot of data for Hawaii and were able to do this. So this is a visual representation of annual severe bleaching conditions in all of the Hawaiian Islands. And so green is where we expect to see it later, red is where we expect to see it sooner. And so once you've got that, then we had all these other amazing data sources that we were just, a lot of people doing a lot of different things, and someone had the foresight to actually get all the information together and start putting it into one visual place into this Highmark database, and other folks have since jumped into it. So we've got all these different studies for the main 8 Hawaiian islands, and through that we're able to come up with relative resilience maps of the different Hawaiian islands. So now we've knocked off that first circle there, the climate change one, and then the resilience, the green one there. And then you move into, also we were lucky enough to have both West Hawaii and West Maui be the subject of an ocean tipping point study looking at cumulative human impacts, and there's several different indices there that you can look at. In the best professional judgment, there's about 6 of them that seem to be more impactful than others. So those are the ones that we really drilled in on to create these maps. And then so cumulative, when you have all of these things together, then you can have these vulnerability maps. So this is a vulnerability map of Hawaii, of all islands compared to each other, and then if you jump forward, then it just looks at the individual islands at the intra-island scale. So you start to see places on maps start showing up where here's probably where you want to do more management, here's probably where you want to do more restoration, and depending on which of those indices might be slightly off, it'll tell you what kind of management action you might also want to take to get to a point where you're lowering the vulnerability and maybe then want to go in to restore. So if it's land-based sources of pollution or a fishing effort, that's certainly something that can be tackled. If it's pure climate, I'm interested to see some of the more aggressive measures that people are considering to actually prevent bleaching and see if that actually works at large scales or not. So just to kind of bring this all home, all this climate vulnerability and assessments can ultimately inform how you restore, where you restore, as well as what management actions that you want to take. So we're in the beginning stages of doing this, but not every place in the world has this kind of information, so I certainly realize this is not a one-size-fits-all solution for folks who are really coming at this from a data-poor situation. But we are kicking off a big initiative in the Pacific along with the Nature Conservancy to take that manager's guide and all of this information and sit down with all of the Pacific territories as well as Hawaii and start to come up with comprehensive restoration projects as well as hopefully larger strategies, which is, we've come a long way in a really short amount of time for where folks were just maybe 5-10 years ago, especially at the territorial level for the states. So with that.